I stood in my driveway staring in shock at my roof. My solar panels, gone. Every single one had been ripped off. The metal brackets lay twisted and broken on the ground, shattered glass from the photovoltaic cells littering my lawn. My heart pounded in my chest as I clenched my fists. I already knew who did this. Karen. She had been fighting me ever since I installed the panels last summer, claiming they were an eyesore and violated HOA aesthetic standards. I had fought back, citing state laws that protected solar energy rights. But clearly Karen wasn't interested in following the law, only her own rules. And now she had gone too far. The sun was setting and the power in my house was already flickering. The entire neighborhood relied on the local power company, except me. I controlled my own power grid. With my solar panels and backup battery storage, I was fully independent. That was my secret. But Karen had just made a terrible mistake. I took a deep breath, suppressing my fury. She thought she had won. But I had a plan, one that would make her regret ever touching my property. And when I was done, she'd wish she had never messed with me. It all started that morning. I had been working in my garage, running maintenance on my battery system. I had built a fully independent off-grid setup. Solar panels, battery banks, and even a backup generator. My system was powerful enough to run my entire house without relying on the city's electric grid. As I wiped the sweat from my forehead, I heard the familiar screech of Karen's voice from across the street. "You think you can just ruin the entire neighborhood with those ugly panels?" she snapped, marching up my driveway in her ridiculous high heels. "This is a respectable HOA community, and I will not allow you to bring down property values." I sighed, already exhausted from dealing with her nonsense. "Karen, we've been over this. The law is on my side. You can't force me to remove them." Her eyes narrowed. "Oh really?" The HOA board voted. "You have 24 hours to take them down or we'll do it for you." I scoffed. "That's illegal." She smirked. "Prove it." With that, she turned on her heel and strutted back to her house, flipping her platinum blonde bob dramatically over her shoulder. I shook my head. She couldn't be serious. But Karen wasn't just serious, she was ruthless. When I stepped outside that evening to take out the trash, I saw them. A group of HOA hired workers on my roof, ripping my solar panels off. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" I roared, sprinting toward them. One of the workers, a burly man in an orange vest, barely spared me a glance. "HOA orders. Lady across the street paid for the removal." I felt my blood boil. "That's my property. You're trespassing." Karen appeared on her porch, sipping a glass of wine with the smuggest grin I had ever seen. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she called out. "It's just a couple of panels. You'll be fine." I clenched my fist. She had no idea what she had just done. I ran to my garage and checked my systems. The main battery backup was intact, but without my panels I wouldn't be able to recharge it. Within hours, my house would go dark. And then, I heard something. A faint hum in the distance. The neighborhood's power lines. An idea struck me. Karen thought she had won. She thought she had all the power. But what she didn't know was that I controlled the entire neighborhood's electricity. And now it was time to show her what real power looked like. I stood in my garage, heart pounding as the hum of the neighborhood's power lines echoed in my ears. Most people didn't know this, but our community ran on a privately managed microgrid, a system I had helped design when the HOA wanted to cut energy costs years ago. I wasn't just some random homeowner with solar panels, I was the architect of the power system Karen thought she controlled. And with a few keystrokes I could change everything. I powered on my control panel, a sleek, custom-built interface that monitored and adjusted the energy flow across the entire neighborhood. I had access to every home's power supply, including Karen's. Karen may have torn down my solar panels, but she didn't realize something important. I still held the switch. And I was about to flip it. After the workers finished tearing down my panels, they left a mess. Broken glass, twisted brackets, and deep scratches on my roof. My blood boiled as I stood in my driveway, watching Karen strut over with her ever-present glass of wine. "You should thank me," she said, flashing a smug smile. "Now your ugly science project is gone. The whole neighborhood looks better already." I forced a calm breath, my fists clenched at my sides. "You know what you did is illegal, right? State law protects solar panels." Karen laughed, cutting me off. "Oh please. The HOA's rules are above the law here. You don't belong in this neighborhood if you can't follow them." My vision blurred with rage, but I didn't take the bait. She wanted me to explode. She wanted to win. But I wasn't playing by her rules anymore. I returned to my garage and pulled up the master access screen for the microgrid. Every home's energy usage flickered on the display. I located Karen's house immediately. Her energy consumption was off the charts: hot tub, home theater system, and at least 3 air conditioners blasting full power. "Let's see how you like it when the power's out," I muttered, my fingers flying across the keyboard. With a few quick adjustments, I rerouted the power supply, just a subtle shift. It wouldn't cause a blackout, but it would create power surges throughout her house. I imagined her sitting in her luxurious living room, just as her lights flickered, and then went off. Not 5 minutes later, a blood-curdling scream rang out across the street. I smirked as Karen burst onto her porch, her hair in complete disarray. "What is going on?" she shrieked, jabbing at her phone screen. I stepped outside, adopting my best innocent expression. "Problem, Karen?" She spun to face me, eyes blazing. "My power's out. My security system isn't working, my hot tub's dead, and the HOA server is completely offline." I tilted my head. "Wow, that's weird. My house is just fine." The color drained from her face. She knew. Somewhere deep inside that power-hungry brain of hers, she knew this was my doing. But she couldn't prove it. "Fix it," she hissed through clenched teeth. I gave her a shrug. "Sorry, Karen. You wanted control, remember? Maybe you should check with the HOA's power management team." Her jaw twitched as she realized I was the power management team. I let her stew in the dark for a while. But that was only the beginning. With the push of a button, I activated a special night mode on the microgrid. It was a little feature I had added, one that subtly prioritized my house's power while cutting energy to anyone I deemed undeserving. Karen's house was plunged into a complete blackout. But it didn't stop there. I redirected the power surge to her home security system. Alarms blared. Lights flickered and buzzed. And just to make things interesting, I overloaded her sprinklers, sending jets of water shooting across her pristine lawn. Across the street, I watched her frantically press buttons on her phone, helpless against the chaos I had unleashed. Karen finally snapped. She stormed over to my driveway, face redder than the cheap wine she guzzled daily. "You did this," she screeched. "I don't know how, but you did. And when the HOA finds out, you're finished." I smiled coolly. "Oh, Karen. You wanted to play games with me." I stepped closer, my voice calm but deadly. "But you forgot one thing. I own the game board." For once, Karen had no snappy comeback. She trembled with fury as the distant hum of the grid pulsed in my ears. "My grid. Now," I added, "you're going to fix my roof. You're going to pay for every panel you destroyed. And if you ever touch my property again, well," I paused for effect. "Let's just say your power problems will be the least of your worries." Her lips quivered, but she said nothing. Because deep down she knew she'd lost. Karen stormed back across the street, but not before giving me a glare that could melt steel. She was furious but helpless. I returned to my garage, the cool hum of the microgrid control panel soothing my nerves. My fingers danced across the keys as I monitored the power flow. Her house was in chaos. Alarms still blared, and I'd reduced her hot tub to a useless plastic shell. But I wasn't done, not even close. Karen wanted a power struggle, and I planned to win it. At 2 a.m., the neighborhood slept peacefully, except Karen. I watched the live diagnostics on my control panel. Her house flickered back to life briefly, only to crash again as I pulled the energy away. Her expensive appliances were struggling under the load. I couldn't help but chuckle as I imagined her stomping through her darkened mansion. But I had one more card to play. I accessed the HOA's central database, another system I had helped install when I first moved in. Karen was obsessive about HOA fines, issuing petty violations for things as minor as mismatched flower pots. With a few keystrokes, I flagged her own house for multiple violations. Excessive noise after hours from the blaring alarms I caused. Unapproved alterations to the property. Non-compliance with HOA energy conservation policies. I smiled as I hit submit. By morning, Karen would wake up to a hefty stack of fines, courtesy of her own system. At sunrise, I brewed a fresh cup of coffee and settled onto my porch. Right on cue, Karen emerged from her house. She looked like a wreck. Her usually perfect blonde bob was a tangled mess, and her silk robe flapped in the breeze as she rifled through her mailbox. She froze when she saw the thick stack of violation notices waiting for her. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the papers, each fine more ridiculous than the last. I could practically see the steam rising from her ears. Then, just as she reached the final notice, her power cut out again. I took a long sip of my coffee and waved. "Morning, Karen. Everything okay?" Her head snapped toward me, eyes blazing. "You did this," she shouted, her voice echoing through the quiet street. I feigned innocence. Me? What are you talking about? Maybe you should call the HOA power management team. Her face turned an impressive shade of purple. I am the HOA. I grinned. Not for long if this keeps up. By noon, word had spread. Other neighbors had started noticing Karen's chaos. Without the microgrid running smoothly, their power flickered too, though none suffered as much as she did. Mr. Thompson, the retired Navy vet from down the street, sauntered over. Heard Karen's been having some technical difficulties, he said, chuckling. Can't say I'm sad about it. Yeah, I said, barely hiding my smirk. Funny how things work out. I heard she's getting fined by her own HOA rules, he added with a laugh. About time someone turned the tables on her. I didn't confirm or deny it. But deep down I knew, the queen of the HOA was starting to crumble. Later that afternoon, Karen tried one last desperate move. A shiny black SUV rolled up to my driveway, and out stepped Robert Green, the HOA's lawyer. A sharp-dressed man with a permanent scowl, he wasted no time marching up to my door. I opened it before he could knock. Afternoon, Robert. What can I do for you? He adjusted his tie. Karen filed a formal complaint against you, claiming intentional sabotage of the HOA's energy grid. I chuckled. You mean the grid I designed and maintain? That grid. His scowl deepened. You know what I'm saying. She wants you to restore her power immediately, or face legal action. I leaned against the doorframe, suppressing a laugh. I'm happy to comply, once Karen pays for the damage to my solar panels. Robert hesitated. He knew I had her cornered. I'll relay your message, he muttered before retreating to his car. That evening I made my last move. With a few keystrokes I restored the neighborhood's power, except for Karen's. For her, I left a little surprise. The moment she turned on her lights, her house blazed neon pink, an override I had secretly programmed. Every light inside and out flashed a glowing pink hue. I knew Karen would hate it. But the neighborhood? They loved it. Social media lit up with pictures of Karen's disco house. Someone even started a hashtag #PinkPayback. The next morning, a defeated Karen showed up at my door. Her voice trembled as she handed me a check, enough to cover every solar panel she destroyed. You win, she hissed. Fix my power. I smiled, pocketing the check. Pleasure doing business with you, Karen. With a few clicks, I restored her electricity. No more pink lights, no more surges. But she knew that as long as I controlled the grid, I controlled her. And from that day on, Karen never messed with me again. For a week, Karen kept a low profile. No surprise HOA violations. No passive-aggressive emails. Just blissful, uninterrupted silence. But I knew better. Karen wasn't done. When a control freak like her loses power, literally and figuratively, they don't give up. They double down. And that's exactly what she did. It started with a knock. Not a polite knock, a banging on my door loud enough to shake the frame. I opened it to find Karen, flanked by 2 city inspectors. She crossed her arms with a smug smile. You thought you were clever, she said. But I'm done playing nice. One of the inspectors, a balding man with a clipboard, stepped forward. We're here to inspect your property. Miss Karen filed a report claiming your solar panels violate city code. I bit back a laugh. She had to be desperate if she was calling in the city. But I wasn't worried. My setup was 100% legal. Go ahead, I said, stepping aside. Inspect all you want. Karen's smile faltered. She expected me to panic, but I had nothing to hide. For the next hour, the inspectors combed through every inch of my system. Meanwhile, I leaned against my porch, watching Karen grow more and more impatient. When they finally finished, the lead inspector shook his head. Everything checks out. His system meets every city code. Karen's face turned red. But that's impossible. Actually, I said, unable to resist twisting the knife, I helped write those regulations. So, better luck next time? She stomped away without another word. But as I watched her retreat, I knew this wasn't over. 2 days later, a letter arrived. This wasn't your standard HOA violation notice. It was a formal demand from the HOA board, summoning me to a special meeting to discuss my disruptive behavior. I laughed out loud. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a setup. Karen wanted to take me down publicly, and she thought dragging me in front of the board would do it. Fine. If she wanted a war, she'd get one. But I had a nuclear option, and I wasn't afraid to use it. The meeting was packed. Word had spread fast and half the neighborhood showed up. Even the neighbors who normally hated HOA meetings came, curious to see Karen's latest power trip. Karen sat at the head of the table, her HOA cronies surrounding her. She smiled sweetly, too sweetly as she banged the gavel. "This meeting will come to order," she said, her voice dripping with fake politeness. "We are here to address the egregious behavior of Mr. My name." I leaned back in my chair, completely relaxed. "Egregious behavior? You mean, fixing the grid you broke?" Her smile tightened. "Your actions have disrupted the community, and your unauthorized use of the microgrid is unauthorized." I cut her off, pulling a folder from my bag. "Funny you say that, Karen. Because according to this legally binding agreement, I have exclusive oversight of the microgrid. Signed by, you guessed it, you." I tossed the document onto the table. It was the original contract Karen herself had approved when I first set up the microgrid. She hadn't even read the fine print, which gave me complete control. The room fell silent. Karen's face paled as she flipped through the pages. You can't just," she stammered. "Oh, but I can," I said, standing up. "And if you push me, Karen, I can shut down every power line in this neighborhood. Including yours." A murmur rippled through the crowd. People were tired of Karen. Her endless rules. Her double standards. And now, her personal vendetta against me. Mr. Thompson, the retired Navy vet, stood up. "This is ridiculous," he said. "The only reason our power works is because he fixed it. Leave the guy alone." A chorus of agreement followed. Even some of Karen's closest allies looked uncomfortable. "You know what?" I said, raising my voice just enough to cut through the noise. "I could walk away. I could stop managing the grid and let Karen take over. But you all know what will happen next." Everyone did. The last time Karen meddled with the grid, half the block lost power for 3 days. "You want her in charge?" I challenged. "Or do you want your lights to stay on?" The answer was obvious. Karen tried to regain control, banging her gavel like a lunatic. "Enough. I'm the HOA president. I make the rules." I smiled. "Actually, not anymore." I slid a second document across the table, a petition to remove Karen from her position. It already had 40 signatures. More than enough to force her resignation. Her face crumpled as she read it. She had lost. The next morning, Karen's HOA resignation was official. She tried to save face, claiming she was stepping down for personal reasons. But everyone knew the truth. And me? I celebrated by installing twice as many solar panels. Karen still lived across the street, but she never bothered me again. Every time she looked at my gleaming solar array, she knew one thing. I controlled the power. And as long as I did, she would never win. For a while, things were quiet. Too quiet. Karen had lost her HOA presidency, and without her constant harassment, life in the neighborhood felt peaceful. People were happier. More relaxed. It was like a weight had been lifted. But deep down, I knew Karen. She wasn't finished. And I was right. It happened one Friday night. I had just settled down to watch a movie when, bam, every light in my house flickered and went dark. I sat up, heart pounding. The grid I built was flawless. It shouldn't fail. Unless I grabbed my phone and pulled up the control app for the neighborhood's power. My system still showed active. So why was my house dark? I stepped outside and scanned the street. Every other house was lit up, except mine. Someone had cut me off. And I had a pretty good guess who. The next morning, I started investigating. I traced the outage to a manual override, which meant someone physically tampered with the system. And only 2 people besides me knew how to do that. One was the city's utility engineer. The other? Karen's new boyfriend. His name was Greg, and he was everything you'd expect. Loud, arrogant, and worst of all, a former utility technician. I caught him working on his truck later that day. He smirked when he saw me. "Problem with your power?" he asked, wiping grease from his hands. I narrowed my eyes. "You know anything about that?" He laughed. "I'm just here to help, Karen. You messed with the wrong people." I clenched my fist. It wasn't just Karen anymore, she had backup. And Greg knew enough to cause real damage. If Karen and Greg wanted to play dirty, fine, but I wasn't about to lose. I spent the next few days upgrading the system. I installed hidden cameras near the grid's control box. And I added a new feature, a trap. If anyone tampered with the system again, it would cut power to one house and one house only, Karen's. I didn't have to wait long. 3 nights later, my phone buzzed with an alert. Unauthorized access detected. I pulled up the live feed, and there was Greg working on the control box under cover of darkness. I smiled. Time to flip the switch. I tapped a button on my phone and in seconds, Karen's entire house went dark. Lights, internet, even the AC, gone. The next morning I was enjoying my coffee when I heard shouting across the street. Karen stormed out, her face red as fire, yelling at Greg. "I told you to mess with his power, not ours," she shrieked. Greg held up his hands. "I don't know what happened. I did everything right." I leaned against my porch rail. "Morning," I called out cheerfully. "Something wrong?" Karen spun around, fuming. "You did this." I shrugged. "Not my fault if someone's messing with the grid. Maybe you should leave it alone." She stomped back inside, slamming the door. But I knew this wasn't over. If Karen wanted a power struggle, she was about to lose more than electricity. For the next few days, Karen's house remained in a state of chaos. With her power out, she had to rely on flashlights, candles, and a gas-powered generator, which I knew she hated. Every night, the loud rattling of her generator filled the neighborhood, and every morning she glared at me like I was the devil himself. But still she refused to back down. And then she crossed the line. It happened just after midnight. I was asleep when my phone vibrated. My security system sent an alert. Motion detected in restricted zone. I bolted upright, grabbed my phone and checked the cameras. There she was, Karen. And she wasn't alone. Greg stood beside her, prying open the locked control box for the microgrid. Karen kept glancing around, whispering urgently. This wasn't a petty act of revenge anymore. This was sabotage. I could have gone outside and confronted them. But I had a better idea. I tapped my phone and dialed 911. "Yeah, I'd like to report a break-in," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Two people are attempting to tamper with the community power grid. I have live footage. Would you like me to send it over?" The dispatcher's tone changed instantly. "Yes, sir. Officers are on their way." I smiled and leaned back in my chair. Karen had no idea what was coming. 5 minutes later, flashing red and blue lights filled the street. I stepped outside just in time to see Karen and Greg frozen in place, caught red-handed. "Hands where we can see them," one of the officers barked. Karen's eyes went wide. Wait. This is a mistake." Greg, the genius, tried to bolt. "Bad idea." One of the officers tackled him before he got 5 steps. I walked up, arms crossed. "What's wrong, Karen? Didn't expect the police?" She spun to face me, her face a mix of rage and panic. "You set me up." I laughed. "You broke into a locked control panel and tried to sabotage a city-approved power grid. That's a crime, Karen. Maybe you should have read the law before breaking it." The officer turned to me. "You pressing charges?" I didn't even hesitate. "Absolutely." Karen and Greg were arrested on the spot. The charges? Trespassing. Tampering with critical infrastructure. Attempted vandalism. Oh, and Greg? Turns out he was already on probation for another offense. That meant he was in big trouble. Karen's husband had to come bail her out, and rumor had it he wasn't happy. The HOA? They called an emergency meeting and permanently banned her from any leadership roles. By the end of the week, Karen was officially powerless. Literally and figuratively. With Karen gone, the neighborhood finally had peace. The HOA even asked me to formally take over managing the power grid. This time I said yes on my terms. As for Karen, she sold her house a month later and moved away. I like to imagine wherever she is now, she's still living in the dark. Because one thing's for sure, she messed with the wrong guy.